Last time on the SNES Geek Show.
And this time it is going to be DreamWorks Super.
What kind of a reviewer am I then? I'm back.
Do you want to know what the best thing about getting a driver license is? Destroying cars, total destruction, and ultimate sadness. That is the only reason why I want to drive a car these days. And if you don't have a driver's license or a car, can you crash in anything at all? Yes, you can with Destruction Derby for the PlayStation 1. I have done a review of this game like 3 years ago. It wasn't very good. I was at a different place, so I think it's about time that I'm going to remake it. So let's do a remake, everyone together, since that is absolutely something that really makes a lot of things happen these days. It's recognizable, people know what it is, they know what I'm getting themselves into. Let's begin! Okay, so the main racing mode is known as Wrecking Racing. You are going to race along a pretty narrow racetrack, trying to wreck the opponent's cars. Along the way you hear a commentator as well as techno music. This is basically the embodiment of mid-90s racing games in the early 3D era. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. For me, this game is actually quite fun to play. There's actually a lot of interesting things at the time which makes this game interesting to look back at from a 90s perspective. Graphically, this game doesn't look very great by today's standards, as the trees are basically 2D sprites. What makes this game still looks different from other racing games at the time is how the colors are presented. All of the cars along the track actually do look distinctly different from one another. It was actually a common practice at the time and not just applied to this game. Heck, the prime example of a game that stands out from the crowd despite being very simple is the original Crash Bandicoot, which even to this day looks great because of the colors. However, unlike Illumination movies, I actually enjoyed this one for quite a while. However, the controls aren't the greatest, as this was at the time before the control sticks was even considered. Yeah, you're playing this game with a D-pad, and it's kinda strange to get used to. And since you are playing this game in a very narrow space, it's practically impossible to not crash into the walls. And you see the shape of a car in the corner? Well, that is basically your life meter. And depending on how much you're being crashed into, it's going to flash in different colors. And when it blacks out, you're ending this race without even being in the finish line. And given the fact that each and every track has many laps, it is going to really take a lot for you to actually get into the finish line within time. Because if you do not actually do well, you are getting low on the scoreboard. And believe me, I have several times before. But you just don't want to get into the finish line, you also want to gather points. And how do you gather points? Well, by simply crashing into opponents. Although some of the highest points are all based if you can actually spin the car around, such as 180 or 360, which will generate you 10 or 5 points. But of course, with this narrow track, or at least this first one, it is real difficult to actually get some of the higher points. And believe me, the top placers has real massive points, which will be pretty hard for you to get. Well, at least on this very first track. But fortunately, there are way better tracks to actually gain points at. Such as the next track known as Cactus Creek, which technically now doesn't feature any creek at all. It's right slap in the middle of the desert, for Christ's sake. But thankfully, this track contains lots of opportunities to smack into your opponent so powerful that you will gain lots of points, as there are lots of crossroads simply went off track. I lost within seconds. And that actually brings up a good point about this game. This is really not just an average run-of-the-mill race. You actually have to put some strategy and thought in how you actually pursue this race. Do you really want to go for the finish line and hopefully gain a great place based on how well you did? Or do you actually want to go for points and potentially not go into the finish line? It actually does add a minor layer of strategy. Speaking of levels, this game actually does have a few interesting levels, although they are pretty basic, and they're essentially just repeats of the same levels over and over again. although it's said during different times of the day. I wonder if this is where Crash Bandicoot got its inspiration for night and day stages based on the same theme. Unfortunately, the time of the day doesn't actually change how the levels work. It's still the same level over and over again. Every race plays out the exact same way. You have to race along a track and either wreck the opponents or head to the finish line at your own turn. Although I think the reason why there were simply no changes is because it was a tall order for a game of this caliber at the time. And given the fact that this was something that couldn't be done on a 2D console, I think that Psygnosis was essentially just testing the waters to see if this could actually work well, and then just build upon the foundation of what was being in the first game. Does this game work intended, or is it simply just a missed opportunity to actually become a great game? I would say this game works as intended. Listen, this wasn't really going to carry the PlayStation to new heights. It was more or less made to show that you can actually do a car crash game on a console, similar to the arcade. Which is something that was going to be a selling point very early on in the PlayStation life, given the fact that our arcade games was still being somewhat popular at the time, despite the fact that they had started to drop in popularity back in 1995. Heck, unless you're actually into this game right from the start, convincing someone to actually buy this game is questionable, especially since the car destruction genre is not really one which is very popular. It has a very niche audience. It's still there, but it's nowhere near as popular as, say, platformers or shooters. And while it may sound like I'm complaining, I'm not really complaining. I'm just questioning the identity of this game in this giant big world of video games. Is this game really going to fulfill someone's life? Is it really going to help someone to go through tough times? Honestly, I don't know. But I bet someone out there really likes this game and helped them through tough times. I'm not saying that this game hasn't meant anything to anyone. I'm just saying that it's not a very big and popular game. Heck, this franchise even died in the mid-2000s, as the last game was released in 2004. Well, at least up to this point. However, there's one thing that I haven't mentioned, and that is really that I've been complaining about the stock car racing, as that is the one which contradicts the core mechanic of this game. What really matters is the Destruction Derby, which is going to be the very last course on this tournament. It is intense, and all of the strengths of the game really does shine when you're actually in this mode, as all of the cars are being seen on screen. There is no noticeable frame rate drops, and it's extremely satisfactory to see all of the car points fly around everywhere. Yeah, sure, it doesn't stay on the ground, but what can you really expect? You really have to stay at the top of your game if you actually want to get far, as all of the cars are really good at attacking each other as well as you. I didn't really did that well within this race. But to be honest, I have been doing better, simply just that it wasn't really shown on screen. Oh, and as well as each other. I cannot forget to tell you about that. But maybe this game wasn't meant to be a mainstay within mainstream game media. This was probably just a springboard to show that it is possible, which is kind of sad. If only a game is being released which can really showcase what car destruction can really do, it can belong to the same ranks as fighting games, which is in Smash Brothers, which is a very beloved genre of video games even to this day. But who knows? It could happen. But when? I have no idea.